On August 14th, Project Veritas released a video with the whistleblower Zach Vorhies. He is the one who leaked the damning internal documents to them back in July. Unlike his first video with James O'Keefe, this time he's gone public with his identity, which in all honesty, with what was exposed, combined with the fact Google knows it was him, that was probably a smart play for him at this point, as was his having Project Veritas release the documents he provided them and turning over an additional 950 more to the Justice Department. Not to mention having those documents on a dead man's switch as well, which he made clear to Google that if anything happened to him, they get released. They didn't get the picture though. Even with him doing these things, Google was stupid enough to try to get him killed by law enforcement. My saying this is my opinion, and I do not believe it is an exaggeration with seeing what transpired. If anything, I'm being nice in how I'm putting things. It appears the higher-ups at Google were hoping that the San Francisco Police Department or the FBI would take care of their little Zach Vorhies problem for them, not only by possibly putting him out of their misery, but also by recovering the incriminating documents in his possession before he had handed them off to the Department of Justice. Of course, this was to be done with no one being the wiser. Too bad for them, he was still able to get them to the DOJ. See, companies like Google, they like to have former police and law enforcement officers like FBI on their payrolls. Their corporate security offices are filled with them. They almost always have someone who was a Fed or a cop with connections within the local police department and or federal agencies running their security, in large part just for situations like this with Zach Vorhies. Those who run security for these corporations are people who handle things discreetly for them. At least usually they do, that is. This is one of the reasons why they are paid the big bucks that they are. But in the case of Vorhies, time was of the essence with his going to the DOJ. They couldn't handle things that way as a result, which is why a bunch of uniformed officers, SWAT, and the FBI were out looking for him, blocking off whole sections of his neighborhood for hours with bomb-sniffing dogs, and did so under the guise of it being a wellness check. There is a slight problem with their claims of it being one. Wellness checks are almost never more than a two-officer operation. They do not require a bunch of uniformed officers or SWAT in tactical gear, never mind the FBI and their cool windbreakers with their initials on them and bomb-sniffing canines. They also definitely don't need those responding to one to be armed like they are doing it in Fallujah during the height of Operation Iraqi Freedom either. Yet, this is exactly what they did. The SFPD is trying to claim that the wellness check was being done because it had been reported to them that Zach Vorhies was suicidal. That would make him a harm to himself if he was, not others, but they handled things as if he was a harm to others, not himself. The fact they were is a major red flag with the SFPD's official story about what they were doing. It's not the only one either. As I have already stated, they blocked off his neighborhood for hours for this supposed wellness check. That is something the police just don't do during one. There is no need to. The only time they do something like that is when they are dealing with someone who is an active threat, such as a shooter or a hostage situation. Then there is the fact they evacuated his neighborhood on top of this. Their evacuating the neighborhood is definitely not something that is done during a wellness check either. That is something that is done when, again, there is an active threat, one usually involving explosive devices. It is done to minimize casualties from them. They're doing this conveniently removed witnesses from the area too, but there is nothing to see what they're doing it, I am sure. On top of this, there was absolutely no reason for there being canine units trained to sniff explosives involved in a wellness check. I could see if in conducting a check, Vorhies turned up missing there being dogs trained to sniff out and find people being brought in. That would make sense, as it would at a certain point if he didn't turn up, bring in cadaver sniffing dogs. But they're bringing in explosive sniffing ones. That makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, as does the FBI being there. If the SFPD was truly making a wellness check, why was the FBI involved with it? Ask yourself that question, think about it, and try to come up with a logical reason for their being there. I have, and for the life of me, I cannot come up with one good reason for their being involved if it was a wellness check. The FBI do not do them. Wellness checks are not within the scope of what it does as a federal law enforcement agency. Plus, doing something like this is below their pay grades. In theory, they have more important things to be doing or worrying about than checking up on someone to make sure they are okay. At least, I would hope they do in this day and age, which the threat of a terrorist or a whack job blowing up something just so happens to be one of those things that is in their pay grade and would be considered important enough for their involvement. And that little wellness check they were on to see if Zach Vorhies was alright, conveniently, it was being run as if they were searching for someone just like that. Go figure. You have uniformed officers out in force in his neighborhood, blocking off the streets and evacuating everyone in the area. SWAT is on the scene in full tactical gear, armed like they're ready to breach. There are explosive sniffing canines sticking their noses in places they don't generally belong. The FBI is in their windbreakers with their initials on them. They all have the place locked down and are acting like there is an active threat involving one or more explosive devices. Yet, we are supposed to believe what they are doing was a wellness check. Seeing all of these things together, I'm not buying it. My IQ isn't low enough to do so. What I believe the game plan was to create a bit of security theater and put on a play for the masses that was going to be used to set up Zach Vorhies as a whack job bomber, included planted evidence, and have him locked up and discredited. Or, the intent was to create that narrative and then use it as a cover for his no longer breathing if they hadn't found him on a crowded street with cameras focused on everything that was going on. I have no proof of either scenario being their game plan, but my gut is telling me one of them would have been the outcome if all eyes weren't on them. My guess would be it would have been the one where he stops breathing, because alive, even if discredited and set up, he has the potential of still being a threat. Where they failed in accomplishing either, along with his getting to the Department of Justice before they could get to him, right now, he is an even bigger threat than he would be otherwise. As the person who collected all of the documents and is being a software engineer familiar with Google's tech, Vorhies knows more than anybody who currently has access to them outside the company about what they are doing and how they are doing it. In any congressional or criminal investigation or hearing, he is the star witness that can hang Google, its executives, and members of management. He is the only one outside of the company who is even close to being an expert on the evidence he collected, and that has a lot of weight and gives him credibility. Having said that, looking at all the documents he provided Project Veritas, I can see why they did what they did with trying to have the San Francisco PD take care of their Zach Vorhies problem. I can only imagine how much worse the 950 additional documents are if Google is sending the San Francisco police and the FBI to do their dirty work for them. As Mr. Mediker is known to say, it gets the old noggin jogging. In going down that rabbit hole, I noticed some very disturbing things. First off, Google's machine learning fairness is less about programming algorithms and more about programming all of us and society without our knowledge or consent. Well, at least in theory, not with our knowledge. But there are always some people who see through the programming. The idea is to have search results align with cultural Marxist and far-left ideologies and beliefs. They have been implementing this more and more, especially since the loss of Hillary Clinton to Donald Trump in 2016. They were caught trying to manipulate search results leading up to the election, hoping to manipulate the election itself. They tried to suppress and hide anything that had to do with Hillary's health in both Google's and YouTube's search results and got caught. They promoted anything negative about Trump to the top of the search results. They even tried manipulating Latino voters into voting for Hillary Clinton and had it backfire on them. They did manage to get them out to vote. The problem is, they voted for Trump and Republicans in record numbers and not their girl Hillary. Their doing this didn't go over too well according to screen captures in the documents Zach Vorhies leaked to Project Veritas too. What motivates these people varies. For some, they are just useful, indoctrinated pawns who have been conditioned and manipulated into going along with the far-left cultural Marxist agenda. For others, they believe that they know better than the rest of us and therefore must save us from ourselves. Then there are those who just like the power of controlling and manipulating people and get off from doing it. There are even those who are part of this because it is what they want. They are the true believers, and to hell with everyone else and what they want. Obviously, others are involved for different reasons as well. Regardless, what they are doing is wrong, and it is clear there are people involved who know this, or they wouldn't have tried to silence Zach Vorhies and recover the documents in his possession like they did. The fact that they did and tried to frame him as an explosive happy whack job, not to mention likely get him killed in the process, it goes to show that people like Sundar Pichai are beyond scared right now. After all, you don't try to frame someone and possibly get them killed like they did unless you are fearing ending up in prison. They tipped their hand in doing it too. If you are doing something that is worthy of a slap on the wrist, if you are about to be exposed, you don't do what they tried to do to Vorhies. But if you are looking at serious time in prison from the exposure, then removing the person who is doing it to you can become a reasonable response to some. The idea being, you get rid of them, you get rid of your problem. The fact that they did try to get rid of their problem by getting rid of him, that should tell us all that what they were up to is a far bigger problem for everyone than he was, and still is, to them. I know that everything here sounds like the elements from the plot to a bad movie. I will be the first to admit that it does. But it makes complete and total sense when looking at everything. It doesn't take wearing a tinfoil hat while doing so for it to either. Zach Vorhies collected a large number of incriminating documents. Google tried intimidation to get them back after some were released through Project Veritas to the public. This left him with limited choices. Vorhies ended up playing the only two cards that he could. He put the remaining files on a dead man's switch to be released to the public and contacted the Department of Justice in order to hand copies of them over to it. The fact he did this, in turn, it left those behind this at Google with limited choices as well, which is what led to their trying to use the San Francisco police and SWAT along with the FBI to get rid of their problem, namely Vorhies. If something had happened to him, they had set up the elements to a good cover story to hide what they had did using security theater. They had uniformed officers blocking off his neighborhood and evacuating surrounding homes and businesses. SWAT was on the scene, armed to the teeth and in tactical gear. The FBI was there in their windbreakers. You even had explosive sniffing dogs brought through the area supposedly looking for things that go boom. All of this was clearly a setup to try to discredit and frame Vorhies with his going to the Department of Justice. If he hadn't got to the DOJ before they got to him and surrendered in public for everyone to see, odds are we would be hearing about a whack job, far-right, former Google employee who has been planning to commit terrorist acts but was luckily stopped by the San Francisco PD when SWAT entered the home and was forced to shoot him. Saying what I have here, I'm not saying the entirety of the San Francisco Police Department is on the take with it. It is common sense that they wouldn't be. But with what happened to Zach Vorhies, it is clear that Google definitely has people on the inside in high places within the police department in order for what happened to happen, including the cover-up of it as a supposed wellness check after the fact. What happened also made clear they most likely have people on the take within the FBI as well. With how powerful Google is, everything surrounding the Zach Vorhies situation should be alarming, but not surprising. Prior to it, we kept getting glimpses of what they were up to. It should have been a wake-up call for what was going on, too. But it wasn't. Hopefully with what Vorhies decided to do and what has happened to him as a result, it all ends up being one. If you liked this video, depending on where you are watching it, please give it an upvote or thumbs up. If you want to know when new content of mine hits the internet, don't forget to subscribe to one or more of my social media or video accounts listed here. Also, with YouTube, don't forget to ring that bell. You can find all of my video content on both BitChute and YouTube. This may not be the case with other places I upload to, but I will try to minimize this happening. You are always welcome to interact with me at any of these sites on the list, so feel free to do so. If you have anything you want me to cover in a video, when it comes to news or current events, send it right along to me. I will try to do my best to cover it. As always, thank you for watching.